The scar-faced William Joyce, or Lord Haw Haw to his British wartime listeners due to his snide upper-class accent, was an Irish-American fascist who, under a fraudulent British passport, fled to Germany in September 1939, where he quickly became the English voice of Nazi propaganda. During the dark days of 1940, when Britain faced possible German invasion, his Germany calling broadcast unsettled the population and concerned the government. 5 years later, the British authorities sought to capture Joyce and other British traitors and put them on trial for high treason. In the meantime, Joyce would try to escape the collapsing Third Reich. The heavy bombing of Berlin in February 1945 led to the Joyces and other broadcasters being moved. The Germany calling team was sent to Aachen on the Dutch border, where programs were made and rebroadcast along the phone lines to Hamburg. On the 7th of April, Berlin decreed that the Joyces should be kept out of Allied hands at all costs. A scheme was mooted to smuggle them to Southern Ireland by U-boat. With the abandonment of the U-boat plan, Joyce was issued with false papers in the name of Wilhelm Hansen, a schoolteacher born in Galway in Ireland. Lord Haw Haw made his last broadcast for the Nazis drunk on the 30th of April 1945.
Many of you may have failed to understand. Let me tell you that in Germany there still remains the spirit.
The next day, the Hamburg radio studios were captured by the British, preventing any further broadcasting. The same night as Joyce's last broadcast, a car took him and his wife to Flensburg. On arrival in Flensburg, they found the car that was supposed to be meeting them had not turned up. Fortunately, their SS driver was authorized to take them over the border to Abenra in Denmark. The plan to get the Joyces to Sweden was still on. William and Margaret Joyce waited for 4 days for news of moving through to Sweden. The problem was that Danish resistance fighters and British special forces had begun taking over the country. Instead, the Joyces decided to return to Flensburg, Admiral Dönitz's new headquarters. On the 11th of May, the Joyces headed for Wassersleben, a nearby village. There, the Joyces found fellow British traitor Edward Bowlby and his German girlfriend. They stayed one night, the next day found lodgings with an elderly English widow. For 2 weeks, the Joyces remained undetected. But the net was starting to close in on William Joyce and his ilk. MI5 were looking for him, as were T-Force. T-Force was a special British Army unit snatching everything from nuclear secrets to war criminals. Dönitz's rump Nazi government was soon arrested by the British. On the 28th of May, the Joyces went into the village of Kupfermüller to buy food. They walked back through the forest gathering firewood and had an argument. In the afternoon, after making up with his wife, Joyce decided to walk alone. He dozed off in some woods. When he eventually awoke, he realized Margaret would be worried and took the road home instead of going through the woods. This was a big mistake. As he walked along, he saw 2 British officers. They looked to be gathering firewood. Joyce said to them in French, "Here are a few more pieces." The officers looked at him, and Joyce repeated what he had said in English. The 2 officers were from T-Force. Captain Bertie Licorice thought the voice very familiar. "You wouldn't happen to be William Joyce, would you?" he asked. In response, Joyce reached into his coat to fish out his false identity papers. But the other officer, Lieutenant Perry, thought that Joyce was going for a weapon. He quickly drew his captured Walter P38 pistol and shot Joyce through the buttocks. Perry was worried when they found that Joyce was unarmed. He thought he'd be in trouble for shooting a German civilian. However, a quick search of Joyce turned up papers for Hansen and also for William Joyce. In a final irony, Joyce had been shot by a German Jew serving in the British Army using a captured Nazi weapon. Joyce was taken to a British military hospital for treatment. His wife Margaret was also detained, and both were questioned extensively by MI5. Once Joyce had recovered from his gunshot wounds, he was sent back to Britain to stand trial for high treason. Joyce's subsequent trial, conviction for high treason, and execution by hanging are outside the scope of this video, but the trial remains a controversial piece of British legal history. You can easily find a detailed examination on Wikipedia and many other sources. I hope you found this video interesting, and if you have, perhaps you consider subscribing to my channel. Many thanks.
Stalin has taken, and how much Stalin wishes. I ask you to remember that